Hello there. This is an incredibly important topic, and I'm not an expert, but I have spent a really long time listening to a lot of different experts to try and come with as much nuance and accuracy as possible. So I'm hoping that we can have a productive conversation. I know it's going to be challenging to be able to discuss things in a way that is productive, but I know that this is such an important thing to go over, so I'm doing this live even though it is very, very contentious. So to start things off, everyone knows that Hamas committed a terror attack against Israelis, and that's kind of when the entire world got involved recently. And that is awful. Everyone should condemn the killing of innocent people. That's so incredibly important. And one thing that I've found, and in media, I'm seeing a lot of really, really bad takes because media is equating critiques of a government with critiques of a people. And I think it's really important for us to be able to critique governments without confusing that with the people that live in these governments. And I think that people are really, really frightened of the idea of being accused of anti-Semitism, which is an awful thing, which has killed people, which has hurt people. One of the commentators that I listened to, he grew up going to Jewish school, and some of his teachers had different tattoos that they had received in concentration camps. And he was told how incredibly important it is that people have a homeland to go to because, America acts like they're so pro-Israel these days. But during the Holocaust, we sent a massive boat back full of Jewish people that were killed. So it is incredibly understandable how important it is to people to feel like they have a place where they can be safe. And this is something that gets people really emotional, understandably so. So it's a really intense conversation to have. And so I want to recognize how legitimate those feelings are, and how if you live in Israel and you spend your whole life having, hearing about how a terrorist organization is bombing you and feeling unsafe, it's super understandable that you would feel animosity towards that group. No one likes terrorists. But I do think it's also very, very important to look at the conflict in its entirety, to look at the history, and to also understand what's really going on. Because if we genuinely don't want this to happen again, then we want to know how to address it in its best way. And if we ignore what's going on with Palestinian civilians, and we ignore the conditions that they were living under prior to this attack, then we just make it more likely that attacks like this will happen in the future. There have been some really brave people who have had relatives who were killed in these attacks who have come forward and said that we need to reckon with that aspect of the conflict as well, in order to prevent it from happening again. So I know that the things that I have to say are in mainstream media. People accuse people who say that Palestinians are being hurt right now of being anti-Semitic. So it is really important that I start off by recognizing where that's coming from and why I understand that those feelings are legitimate, based on legitimate fears, because anti-Semitism is a real thing. So I tried to go all the way back through history, and depending on when you start in history, you can blame it on anyone. The best people really to blame things on, of course, is the British back then. Love British people. This is a government thing, guys. Back then, it was a kind of a common, thing for the British to go in and cause a little bit of conflict here and there. So basically, They wanted to help people who were of Jewish descent return to Jerusalem. This was for a myriad of reasons, some of which was based on, biblical beliefs that when a bunch of, Jewish people return to Jerusalem and the homeland, then it will bring about, the end times and rapture and people go up to heaven and all that sort of thing. So that was a little bit of it. Another part of it was that, over time, especially as time went on, there was a lot of anti-Semitism throughout the world. So there were legitimate concerns that people needed a safe place to go. So when Jewish people first started moving to, the area that is now, Israel and Palestine back, early in the century, a lot of people who were Muslim were actually selling the land to these Jewish people. And they had a lot of anti-Semitic feelings going on at the time. The British propped up a guy to kind of head the Arabic faction that was pretty anti-Semitic. And then a lot of the Jewish people, in response, they only hired people. That is correct. Jews have been in Israel since way back when. And it's kind of like a come and go thing, which is why it's really difficult to assign blame. So I'm doing some broad brushstrokes. And that's also why it has been really difficult, because both groups of people feel like they have a right to this land. And a lot of conflicts have been because people feel like they have a right to the land. That's a super legitimate way to look at the conflict from both perspectives, what they feel like their right is in the situation. Now, when Britain, came in, a lot of, Jews and Arabs were living together, and they were actually doing all right together. And it became more complicated as British, institutions set up things just for Jewish people, and that kind of started to segregate the population more and more. And as time went on, ultimately, there were some riots that killed Jewish people, which was tragic. And so then, Britain came in and put them down in a pretty violent way. And this sort of violence has continued both sides back and forth for a really, really, really long time. As time has gone on, of course, Britain got out of there after World War II. And then, America, who turned away Jewish people during World War II, they actually said, okay, well, now we're pro-Jewish people because we were the ones who were sending people back to be killed, And so now we want to be like, oh, yeah, no, we're good people. So America became very supportive of Israel. And because politicians are so hesitant to be considered anti-Semitic, they have decided to support the government of Israel no matter what, without any sort of discussion of what is currently going on. So for the last 50 years, it has been an occupied territory for Palestinians. The Romans, the Ottoman, yes, lots of different people have ruled in the area. It is a very complicated area for sure. So trying to establish complete the right of a group of people to live there is really difficult. And let me tell you, I have really, really tried, because wouldn't it be so much easier to be like, these people are bad, these people are good, this is a simple solution. That's what would be the easiest thing to do. And I cannot actually figure out a way to simplify it. So I feel like the best thing to do is to try and have as much information as possible so that we can be as informed as possible. And the goal is to protect civilians and innocent people and to try to understand something that is complicated and not simplify it down to some slogans that just really aren't going to cut it, that aren't going to explain what's going on at all. make Palestine a parking lot. I do want to get to some of that sort of rhetoric, and it's understandable that people are angry at Palestine because they feel like all of Palestinians are Hamas, and Hamas, a terrorist organization, killed 1,400 people that were innocent recently, and that is really, really vivid in our mind. So it's understandable that people are feeling so passionate about it. Now, here's the thing. About half of the people living in Gaza are children. So they definitely didn't ever vote for Hamas. They couldn't have. I think it was only about 7% of the population that ever voted for Hamas. And if you listen to, people in the military saying the best way to deal with and get rid of Hamas is to actually go in and provide humanitarian aid to Palestinians and let them see Israel as the good guys and have them turn against Hamas and then provide information and then have targeted strikes to either arrest or kill, Hamas fighters. Because if we look at the numbers right now, there have only been 13 confirmed kills of Hamas fighters. 13 out of 4,000 or 5,000 dead Palestinians. We already know that about 63% of the people who've been killed since this, tragic attack has been about 63% women and children. So those are not the Hamas fighters. Those are innocent people. And if we ignore this aspect of it, then we're doing ourselves a disservice because we're not allowing ourselves to have a full vision of what's actually going on. And we also don't allow, a better solution to come because we want to have this sort of thing stop. Okay, I need to catch up. Israel at least offers peace treaties. Palestine doesn't want to coexist. See, I understand why you're saying that. It's actually interesting because did you know that Netanyahu recently rejected an offering of some of the hostages back? Now he's not doing that anymore. He's accepting hostages now because people found out and they're like, you're a dick for that, obviously. And the reason he didn't want to accept those hostages back was because he has such unwavering support from the populations around the world that he doesn't want to jeopardize that. He doesn't want there to be anything other than the narrative that all Palestinians are dangerous to Israel. And that is a narrative that is convenient for him because it allows him to bomb. But he's bombing so much. During when we were bombing people after 9/11 in the Middle East, we dropped 6,000 bombs in a month. That number of bombs was dropped in a week. Gaza has been leveled. The amount of people that have died is absurd. I think there were 61 hospitals that have been, or hospitals or medical centers, let me be as accurate as possible, that's what I'm here for, have been damaged or attacked. And I'm not including the one that they're saying might have been done by a misfired rocket by Hamas and might be by, Israel. I'm not even including that. That would be 62. So the point is, we are looking at a civilization that has a lot of people in it that are innocent, that are being hurt. It's like if there was an evil group of people in Detroit and they did terrible, awful things, do we bomb all of Detroit? Or do we get the people who did the terrible things? And that does matter. Just because some people are awful doesn't mean that it's okay for us to be awful. Okay, let me go back. Palestine doesn't want to live with Israelis on earth. That is a narrative that has been said a lot. And I think Hamas does have very extremist views. Hamas is bad. I do not support that in any way. But there's a lot of people in Palestine that don't necessarily feel that way. And, when I was trying to do some research for this, because I wanted to be as nuanced as possible, I was looking at a lot of things that were going on before this most recent conflict. I was trying to establish what has been happening in Palestine. And I listened to some people who actually lived through apartheid in Africa, and they were making statements like it was worse in Palestine than during like Africa's apartheid, because not only were they sectioning off these people based on, their ethnicity, but also there was bombings during the time. This wall that has been built in, the West Bank area, and separating out, Gaza and everything. They are calling it a partition that basically means the same thing to separate as apartheid, the word, meant in Africa. It's very much a separation based on ethnicity, and it is something that, the UN, Amnesty International, and the Human Rights Watch have all called apartheid. So it is a situation that has been ongoing and has been pretty tragic for Palestinians living there. For example, long before this was happening, there was like a water treatment facility that was bombed, and then they didn't allow the parts to come into Gaza that would allow them to repair it so they could have clean water. So only 1 in 10 Palestinians actually have access to clean water, and that kills a lot of people. I'm pretty sure the average age there has been like 18 for a while because it's not a place where you can thrive. Israel even figured out like basic caloric needs and limited things like chocolate, historically, because they did not feel that these people deserved to have an excess of caloric, foods. It's a lot of things that have been really hurtful to people who are innocent. And the fact that Hamas exists gives an excuse to continue to hurt the population as a whole. So I think Hamas is really quite awful because they're not helping, the Palestinian cause at all. It's giving an excuse here. The interesting thing is the Israeli government has supported Hamas in the past. Crazy enough. Netanyahu has been, quoted saying that they should support Hamas way back in the day because it allowed them not only to segregate out, Palestinians, but it also allows them to demonize, the Palestinians, and it allows them to have this system where you call a group of people animals and you devalue their worth. There was actually an individual, gosh, what was his name? The military governor in the 80s, he actually told the New York Times that he went ahead and gave monetary support to Hamas during that time because there was some more left-wing people who were becoming more popular politically in the area, and they were used to squash them. So a lot of this has been supported by powerful people in the Israeli government because it really has Hamas is the excuse for all of this. But, I listened to this really interesting commentator, and he talked about how in the West Bank, there is no Hamas. And yet in the West Bank, where there's no Hamas, there's also a lot of killing of Palestinians. And if we look historically, I think up to now, it's been like 22 Palestinians to every like 1 Israeli person killed. Obviously, killing civilians at all is terrible, but it has been disproportionate before this attack happened. And this attack was evil and should be condemned in every way. But to ignore what was going on beforehand just allows this sort of unrest to continue more and more. And it puts Israeli people in danger as well, because when you don't live with enough food and water, and, right now the hospitals don't have, they're performing surgeries without anesthesia or painkillers, it's such a terrible way to live that breeds hate. So even if you wiped out pretty much everyone, there are people that are losing their innocent family members, and that's how you radicalize people, is when people are being killed indiscriminately. This is not how to get rid of or deal with Hamas. Okay, let me see where we're at. Okay. Are you getting these stats from Hamas? That's a really good point to bring up. Some dudes, Hamas puts the numbers out. Why would you agree with them? I've heard that quite a lot. One reason is back when during the protective edge days, the numbers that came out of Palestine about the numbers of people killed was pretty on par with what was confirmed later on by outside organizations. So if we look historically at the numbers of dead that have been put out, by, and it's people associated with Hamas, because right now that's who's running, some of their political stuff, but it is, somewhat separate people. But the fact that in the past, the numbers have been accurate and we have been able to go in and determine, yes, they were correct, it means that they are numbers that are somewhat reasonable to go off of now. Of course, we have heard, from the Israeli government that there were only 13 people that they could, confirm were Hamas that they killed, and that there have been, thousands of people. So it lines up with what both governments are saying. And also, if the Israeli government allowed more journalists in there, that would be great, because more information is better. But right now, with the information that we have, we're looking at an over 90% civilian casualty rate. So even if you change the numbers drastically, it would still be really bad. Sounds like CNN. No, CNN has had terrible takes. I would hope not. Who would Israel negotiate with? He has no Muslims willing to negotiate with. So like I said, some of the people that I've listened to, from military backgrounds have talked about focusing on humanitarian aid so that they can win over the population. Because when you're dealing with a population who most of them didn't vote for Hamas, and also most of them don't have the ability to have food or clean drinking water, if the only place you can go to get food or clean drinking water is Hamas, then you're less likely to give information that would help bring them down, because as of right now, they don't even have anyone to help them. There's literally roads in the West Bank that are for Jewish people only. The level of discrimination is almost cartoonish. So what needs to happen is Israel needs to not sink to the level of Hamas. Hamas did something evil. They went in and they indiscriminately killed civilians that did not deserve to die. Hamas did something truly evil. And so Israel goes, hold my beer, That's not what is the most effective. Just because Hamas is doing evil things and should be ended does not mean that there is no human being that is of this particular ethnicity that would be the most willing to listen to the people that are showing a little bit of kindness. It's incredible to see, the videos coming out of there. There's so many children that, the parents are having to write their names on their legs because they're expecting them to literally be blown up and be in pieces. This is a tragic situation that is ongoing. And and these things are against international law. This is not following rules of engagement. When you have a war, there's still rules, and you're not supposed to target civilians, and things like turning off the water to the area, which thank God they turned back on to part of it. But that is a war crime because it is indiscriminate killing. Just like when Hamas committed a war crime by going in and killing these innocent Israeli civilians. We have to be the better people. We have more, Israel is supported with American firearms and money and is more powerful. So they have to be the better people, but they are turning around and they are not exhibiting that sort of effectiveness to actually get rid of Hamas. 35 UN staffers have been killed. A lot of UN buildings have been damaged. There are tons and tons of displaced civilians. There are about 600,000 displaced civilians in Gaza that have nowhere to go. And when they were told to go to South Gaza, I think was it 70? I think it was 70 got bombed on their way trying to do what they were told to do. So, let's see. Look at the map. 99% of the land is Arab. So it's very interesting I'm talking about Israel and Palestine right now. And it's interesting. Originally, one of the agreements had less of the land mass going to Israel, but Israel got the more like economically productive areas, way back when in one of the original agreements. But now, I mean, Gaza's like about the size of Detroit, It's not large, but it has a ton of people in there, like 2.2 million people in there. And throughout the West Bank, the wall has actually, woven through areas and has created even like little walled ghettos. And when you have a little tiny city that has been walled off, you can't really create any sort of economic success there, especially when everything that enters and exits is controlled. Next to these walls that Israel has built, they have sprayed pesticides to create a buffer zone, which has cut into, I think, 30% of the farmland for Palestinians. And then, of course, if you approach these walls, you can be executed. And it has cut into their territory even more. These walls actually are not even running along the like green technical lines. They have allowed Israel to take even more land. So it has really squished the Palestinians into smaller and smaller areas. The Palestinians don't control most of the water that they have access to. A lot of their groundwater is even sent out to Israel. And a lot of their fishing area they don't have access to, and they don't have rights over their airspace. They cannot set up any sort of airports. There's a lot of things that do not allow them to succeed, and so they really are not a separate country. They really are completely under the control of Israel, and because Israel has so much more money and so much more power, and the ability to be more targeted, because there are weapons. They target where you want them, whereas Hamas is putting together these like pretty sad, explosions comparatively, because, most of the things that enter are limited by Israel. But it is interesting that, you can't get chocolate, you can't get things to fix the wastewater treatment plant, but somehow you can get enough things to make explosives. It kind of makes me wonder, is Hamas's existence continually benefiting, the Israeli government and allowing them to exercise more control over their population too? Netanyahu's passed laws saying that he can lock up people who say things against, the cause right now. So no one is happy. Okay. It's been proven Hamas fired that rocket. I know what you're talking about. And actually, it's gone back and forth. So Israel and after some rights organizations came out and said that it was done by Israel, then the U.S. government's like, no, it was Hamas. And then another organization came in and looked at what they were talking about. And they were like, so the explosive that you're saying saying was set off by Hamas was actually not even the one that destroyed the hospital building. And it was also coming from the Israeli side. So either way, to me, it's neither here nor there, because 61, medical facilities were bombed by Israel. So is the one, like, Hamas is bad. I'm not arguing that at all. Like, so arguing about this one hospital, I think, is just getting a little bit lost in the sauce. Like, yes, I've listened to how it sounds like it's a more powerful explosive than what Hamas has access to. I've listened to the sound, but of course, that is not definitive. And other people have said that the recording saying over, hearing Hamas operatives talking about it doesn't have the correct accent, and it also doesn't really have like the type of bombing in the background that you would expect. Plus, they use radios and not really cell phones, so it doesn't fully match up the evidence that supports that it was Hamas. But Hamas is bad, so whether Hamas did it or Israel did it is, I think it's not the most important thing to get hung up on. They had a chance to get out. So being able to move the amount of people that they needed to move, in the amount of time that was given was not enough, for one. For two, a lot of these medical facilities have been, damaged, and a lot of people are not well enough to move. Also, there's not really a great place to go. So they sent them to, South Gaza, but they're still bombing in South Gaza too. And people got bombed in the caravans on the way there. So saying that they had a chance to get out is not really enough to make it a humanitarian situation. Plus, a lot of the times that they warned, they bombed with a smaller bomb to warn about the bigger bomb coming. That was a thing too. So why would Hamas hide behind their own citizens? That's a terrible thing to do. It seems like this is, the only fully documented case of hiding behind civilians that I have been able to get really good information on, ironically, was on the Israeli side. But I don't doubt that Hamas would do terrible things like that. The fact that they decided to do this terrorist attack is hurting their own people more than anybody else by an order of magnitude. So, that is awful. And they are bad, and we should deal with them. And the way that we're dealing with them is not effective. Shilling for Israel for free. I don't know what that means. White kids in SF chanting from the river to the sea. I don't even know what that refers to. I've tried so much to really get a broad understanding of this, but there's so many things. I wish I knew so much more. It's a lot. And I see some really bad takes on this conflict. And I understand, because people get emotional, and it's a lot harder to look at the nuance of a situation when you're feeling emotional about something. And I get it, but it is so important that we can have these conversations that are more nuanced. Okay. Imagine shilling for people that want you dead. Okay, I don't think that's to me. They're taking care of the tears that the U.S. should have taken care of. I don't know what that means either. You'll never catch me supporting an ethno-state. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Israel is an ethno-state. So it's interesting when people say that they're the only democracy in the Middle East, because is an ethno-state a genuine democracy? And they've not been super secretive about it. Now, there's so many amazing, incredible Israeli people who have lived in fear their entire life, and my heart goes out to them. And I have spent a lot of time listening to the people who are affected by, survivors from this awful terrorist attack. And I think it is very important to recognize their pain. And it is also important to condemn the actions of a government that is committing apartheid. So you're going to ride the fence and not have an opinion. Okay, I think this is back and forth anatomy. Sorry. Why do you care about terrorists? Okay. So here we are. Very important. I know this is going to come up a whole lot, so don't support terrorists. And a lot of people believe that Palestinians are all Hamas. And even if you look at, people that were involved in the election, I mentioned it was probably 7% at most. We're talking about a population that is half children, So do we think that the children are terrorists? Is that the assertion? But it's not your fault for believing that, because that's what's being said in the media. Literally every time I hear someone try to discuss this with Nuance, all I hear back is, you just support terrorists and you don't care about innocent civilians. And it's like, can we please recognize that terrorism is bad, and also that state-sponsored terrorism is bad? I think, both things can be true. Someone thinks I'm lying. That's the thing I'm here to do, is to be as accurate and truthful as possible. And I'm going to be wrong sometimes, but I don't have a need to just push a narrative. And I feel like that's what we're missing in policy. So if nothing else, I might be wrong in things, but I'm going to be as honest as I can. Okay. It's a divide and conquer strategy. Yes. Googled some random topic and it's talking on it now. I don't know what that means. A lot of ignorance in the chat. See, I appreciate anybody who's willing to share, though, because there's so many people giving really bad takes in outlets that are supposed to be trusted. So if we can discuss things together and teach each other things, I feel like everybody's actually doing pretty well. I thought people were going to be much more unkind. First priority, hostages. Second, get rid of Hamas. Yeah, like I said earlier, though, Netanyahu rejected some of the hostages, and Hamas has apparently, according to one of the hostages, is, treating them well, and that is bad to have hostages. So it's like, we need to get the hostages back by doing targeted strikes against Hamas, because bombing indiscriminately could literally kill the hostages too. The bombing is not effective. Someone saying that I'm biased, and I think that bias is inevitable, and I think the best way to deal with what your inevitable bias will be is to try and challenge your own beliefs. So because before all of this happened, before the terrorist attack happened, I was pretty aware of what was going on with, the atrocities that have been committed toward Palestinians. I spent a really long time listening to Israeli voices talk about the conflict. And I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that I didn't focus too much on the aspects of apartheid, but also because not enough people are talking about it because it's scary and they don't want to be called anti-Semitic. It is very important for me to be willing to be hated and bring up those things too. Palestinians have a right to fight against the apartheid regime. But the thing is, the violent attacks by Hamas to fight against it is so counterproductive. The best way to get the international community on your side, which is what is needed, is to do non-violent protests. Now, the issue is we have had tons of Palestinians who walked up to the border and were slaughtered. That has happened. We have had general strikes in the area, and up to now, nothing has come of it. I think primarily because politicians are so scared of being called anti-Semitic. So I understand why it might feel like they have limited options, and it is very overwhelming. But even if your only goal is to get rid of Hamas, bombing won't work. It's got to be targeted, and humanitarian aid towards the civilians will allow you to get that intel. Palestine is responsible. They're not releasing the hostages. They are starting to release some. So Hamas is responsible for this escalation, not Palestine. You don't get water, you do have to release the hostages. So that is a war crime. I understand why wanting the hostages back is so important. And obviously they should not have hostages. That is bad. Turning off their water could also kill the hostages, because if nobody has water, then the hostages die too. So hostages are bad. We don't want that. And also war crimes are bad. We don't want that, because it is illegal to punish an entire population of civilians for the bad deeds of a terrorist group or of a, government. Maybe the bombings will stop if they release the hostages. And here's the thing, though. Before the hostages happened, there was bombing happening in Gaza before all of this. Like, it's been going on for a long, long time. Like, electricity plants have been bombed. Civilian infrastructure was getting bombed before this terrorist attack. This has been going on for years. The bombing has been going on for years. So no, the bombing won't stop when the hostages are released. We know that because the bombing was going on before the hostages were taken. So, but I agree 100% hostages should be released. Okay, a lot of people agree that the hostages are very, very seriously needing to be released. And that is very true. 100%. Sympathy for Gaza, not Palestine. Okay, so I'm not sure what you mean by that. Maybe you mean not Hamas. Okay, so there was no destruction of the hospital building that came from Palestine. I don't know what that means. Israel holds all the power. Yes, I do. If you saw the press release on the GoPro from Hamas terrorists, it would open. Oh, all right. So if you saw the film of the atrocities, yes, that is bad. Okay. Yep. Now people think I'm anti-Semitic, which is why I started with the conversation that I did. But of course, people will come in later on. Okay. Yep. Okay. So it's saying that a lot of Americans support Israel, and I think supporting Israeli civilians is very important because, you know, the trauma that they have gone through because of Hamas for their entire life is really tough. And this is on the background of genuine anti-Semitism. People have grown up both in America, around the world, and in Israel, fearing because they are Jewish. And that is a terrible position to be in. It's truly awful. And I feel like that our insistence on saying that Jewish people are being equated with a government that is doing bad things. Sorry. I feel like that is very racially problematic. Oh my God, I need some water. 2 seconds. My heart goes out to people who have lived with genuine anti-Semitism. And I feel like that our insistence that discussing a government's actions is somehow against Jewish people as a whole, it honestly devalues the atrocious nature of anti-Semitism. Like, actual anti-Semitism has killed people, has bombed people, caused the Holocaust. America, we're acting like we're so pro-Israel now, but we really didn't help Jewish people when they needed it the most during World War II until the end after we were bombed. So it is really important, I feel like, to be able to ask governments to behave in ways that are responsible and to not commit atrocities and then hide behind their citizens. Because I'm not a Jewish individual, but my God, if I had a government doing terrible things and then saying that if you critique that, then it's against all people of a certain race, that to me sounds very racist. And that has made it so that we cannot discuss actual solutions because we can't get past this fear of being misinterpreted. It's insane. We critique every other government, but this narrative that this one government cannot be critiqued out of a fear of conflating this hatred that is very real towards people who have lived in awful situations. World War II wasn't that long ago. We're conflating this pain and this suffering with a government's actions, and we need to give them carte blanche now. That is a disservice to the Jewish community. And there are so many Jewish voices, so many that I have listened to on this topic that have helped me arrive at the conclusions that I have arrived at, because a government is different from an ethnicity. And when we confuse that, it hurts everyone. Oh, okay. Okay. So people are talking about like universities and stuff, and that's another aspect of this. And that's why I have focused a lot on what is going on with Palestinians, because heaven knows we've heard a lot about the evils of Hamas. We get that. We're very aware of that. But I am seeing in countries around the world, there are laws that are being passed against, any sort of rally in support of Palestinian independence. Obviously, any rioting is bad. Violence is bad. But I'm also seeing different politicians getting like excommunicated from their parties. I'm seeing, people lose their jobs for speaking out saying that the civilians that are being hurt in this conflict on the Palestinian side is something to be concerned about. So it is something that I'm seeing from a lot of people who previously said that free speech was very important are now trying to punish people for speaking out in a way that is nuanced about this conflict, that does care about innocent people on both sides. And I hate the term both sides. But in this scenario, in every war, there are innocent civilians that should be cared about. The idea that an entire ethnic group is all a terrorist organization is reductive to the point of like ridiculousness. And, you know, that it's unfortunate that we can't get past some of these concepts because we've been told them so many times. Okay. You know what the term means, occupy, settler, nuance. So yes, I guess I didn't really talk about the settlers that much, yet. So, that's another example of how it's an apartheid situation, because right now there is a right of return for people of Jewish descent who lost their homes during the conflict. Let me see, what year was it? It was 1948 Israeli Israeli war. So even though Palestinians who lost their homes during the same time, they are not allowed to reclaim any homes that were lost during that time. They're especially not allowed to reclaim any homes that were lost in 1940 when a mass exodus and throwing out of Palestinians that many people refer to as an ethnic cleansing occurred. And a lot of these Palestinians still have proof that they, you know, own these buildings, and they are not able to present it even when they have documents of ownership and keys and things like that. Sometimes they can see where they used to live, where they've been relocated to. But we have people from New York getting to show up in the settlements just because they're of Jewish descent and being able to claim that. So that sort of racial discrimination purely on the basis of your ethnic group is one of the classic things that shows that a system of apartheid is in place, because it's not just about the year that it happened. Like, yes, more people who were Jewish were thrown out of their houses during 1948. So the law focuses on that. And then more Palestinians lost their homes in 1940. But even if Palestinians lost it in the 1948 period, they cannot have this same right to return. So it is very important for us to recognize that this system of apartheid is occurring, and it is a lot of there's a lot of human rights abuses going on. And these human rights abuses make people more desperate. And I listened to this one interview by an individual. He grew up in, he grew up in Israel, and his 13-year-old cousin was killed by a suicide bomber. 13-year-old little girl getting ready to go to school, an Israeli girl, was killed. And the girl's mother went to him and said, what we need to understand is that this is going to continue happening until we deal with this situation as a whole. She saw that this tragedy that should have never happened by these people that did something incredibly depraved and were desperate enough to kill themselves in the act. This little innocent child was a victim, and the mother was very concerned with dealing with the system of apartheid, because she knew that people would continue to do these depraved acts while they were being treated like animals in cages. And the real goal should be to stop the depravity and to stop innocent people from dying. And most of the people, okay, most, I'm not sure, but a large portion of the people in Israel don't think that Netanyahu's doing a great job. Most people are feeling animosity towards Palestinians because they feel unsafe, understandably so. But a lot of people don't feel like he's doing a good job keeping them safe. And that is true because these conditions make it more likely that innocent people will die, and that is unacceptable. And if we ignore everything around it and indiscriminately bomb, we are just creating more people who are angry and desperate and mentally disturbed enough to grow up and do depraved things that will hurt more innocent civilians, and that should not be the goal. Someone's calling it a Marxist ideology. I'm not sure what exactly you're referring to. I don't really like naming political factions because I feel like it's so easy to fall into a group and then end up ignoring things that are legitimate and important because you want to be a part of your group. So I just try to approach things with as much intellectual honesty and curiosity and a willingness to be wrong that I can. And that means that in different scenarios, the way that I speak about things are going to line up with different ideologies in different ways. I am more on the left, obviously. A lot of my followers are more on the right. And I love that because I just want to create a space where we can discuss things. And I'm really, really proud of that. But I don't like getting in the little names. Okay, let me go. Palestine's rejected the two-state solution. Okay, gosh, I'm trying to catch up with you guys and I have to comment. Okay, so the two-state solution I don't think is going to work. I know. And that's the only one that has been accepted in our political establishment. And the reason why I don't think it's going to work is because there's not two states in this scenario. If there is a, civilization that can't get chocolate in and doesn't control their airspace and is getting, a lot of their farmland decimated and doesn't control any of, can't get, provide their own power because they're getting bombed, can't get the equipment to fix it, that is not a state. So we don't have two states right now. What we have is a single state. Israel is controlling the area. And then we have an area that I think has been referred pretty accurately as an open-air prison when you look at Gaza. Because if you look at the concept of a prison, you see the inmates have a lot of different areas that belong to them inside of the prison. And the thing that makes it a prison is the fact that they can't get out. And people in Gaza really are having trouble getting out at all. There has been a minimal amount of people that have been allowed to enter into Egypt. But for the most part, they're really not able to get out, and they have been pretty consistently bombed. So I just don't think there's two states. I think that maybe once upon a time that was possible, but that has gone. So I think what we need is an actual democracy. I think that we have proven throughout time that different ethnic groups can live together. America is a perfect example of a melting pot that has been able to come together. And I think that Hamas does need to be dealt with, and I think it can be dealt with in a targeted manner. Yes, release the hostages. Palestine is getting bad press. Honestly, I'm surprised that anybody in this stream at all has any sympathy for Palestinians, primarily because most of what I've heard has been equating Hamas with Palestinians. And so that is something that I definitely expected, and I'm honestly surprised and impressed that people are willing to have the nuanced conversation. Oh, someone said by definition it's not apartheid. So let's get into the definition of apartheid. So apartheid is literally the word that in Africa meant to separate. And so basically they separated people based on their ethnicity. The longer I talk, the more I can't. But it's a big topic. So in Africa, they, separated people based on their ethnicity. We've already very much established that that's going on. I mean, for God's sake, there are roads that are Jewish only. They have yellow license plates so that they know that these roads are, allowed, which is something they didn't even dream of in Africa. And in fact, when they broke up, different factions in Africa, they had more power than the factions that have been segregated in Palestine because they're smaller, they're more walled off, their ability to get different things into the area has been very limited. And so actually, the segregation of people in apartheid Africa was awful and terrible. And when you look at it compared to what's happening in Palestine, the Palestinians have even less of an ability to economically thrive because they cannot get their basic needs into the area because they can't import basic things. And this happened long before this awful, terrible terrorist attack occurred. So the definition of apartheid, it really is actually the word that is an African word, and the wall is actually a word that God, what is the name of it? Anyways, the meaning is the same, to separate the wall that runs through the West Bank and everything. So they're using the same language to delineate this segregation. Also, another aspect of apartheid is that it has been determined to be illegal by international organizations, which is why people are wanting to use that particular term, even though it is an African term, in this scenario, because it gives you more power to say, no, don't do that. So another aspect of it is it has to, hurt the population that is being discriminated against. I think that's something that we have been able to substantiate pretty solidly. If you are allowed to return to homes based solely on your ethnicity, not just on the year, even though the year is specified to be able to target a little bit more, they still have determined that you must be of Jewish descent to be able to have this right to reclaim any sort of homes. And with the settlers, those are considered to be illegal settlements by the international community, because some of the people happen to have, Jewish ancestry, but they're coming from New York and have no actual family ties to the area. And they're throwing out people that actually do have ties based on ethnicity. And then we have lots of other examples of how people have been getting killed long before this terrorist attack and this escalation of the conflict, year after year. I mean, there were years where, it was 22 Palestinians killed for every one Israeli. This has been an ongoing thing. So it has been a targeted oppression of a group based on their ethnicity.